Okay, we are live. So welcome to Ask Cam, and this is our consumer team edition. So if you have tuned into our live streams previously, you may know my face. I am Rosie. I'm the partnership and communications lead here at Citizens Advice Manchester, and I am joined by the lovely Daisy, who is one of your senior consumer team advisor. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yeah, that is correct.
Great, that's lovely. Thank you very much for joining me today, Daisy. So we're going to be talking all things kind of consumer advice. And as always, if you are tuning in live, we will be taking your questions live. So if you have something that you would like to ask Daisy about your consumer rights, please do pop your questions in the chat box or the sort of comments function, and we will answer your questions as they come in. But to kick us off, Daisy, can you just tell me a little bit more about what the consumer team actually do?
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, as you said, I'm a senior support advisor for the Citizens Advice Consumer Helpline, and we offer free and impartial legal advice on consumer issues. So that could be goods that you've purchased or a service that's been provided. So it could be a holiday that you've booked, a car that you've purchased, building work that you've organised. We offer a consumer their legal rights up to the point of the court process. And we also work alongside trading standards in partnership with them. So we can pass information through to trading standards. And obviously for instances such as rogue traders or traders that aren't complying with consumer law, we can also report that to trading standards as well. We do get quite a lot of weird and wonderful queries at times being on consumer.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's great. I love it. I love working there. I've worked there since last year, and yeah, it's a great team to be a part of.
Yeah, they're fantastic. That's a really good summary, I think, of all the things that we do. So thank you for that. So in terms of, obviously, you say you joined us last year, and obviously last year was a very notable time in the sense that we were hit with the pandemic. Obviously, in terms of our sort of the Citizens Advice Service, that sort of the mainstream Citizens Advice Service, if you like, we've obviously seen a bit of a change or a development in the way that people access advice and the sorts of things that people are coming to us for help with. In terms of consumer law, has it changed in terms of the pandemic for consumer service, or have things stayed the same?
Yeah, definite changes. I mean, I joined in the midst of the pandemic, and obviously the calls that we were getting at that time, the queries compared to now are completely different. I mean, obviously so many changes happened in the pandemic. A lot of events, holidays, bookings were cancelled. Yeah. Got a lot of queries about cancellations. A lot of companies were dissolving and going into liquidation. People were also struggling to, pay their own contracts due to loss of income, etc. We had a lot of calls and questions about that at the time. Even things that you wouldn't necessarily expect, like social distancing restrictions, they affected building work. Traders couldn't always carry out work. Obviously, we had a lot of reports of traders not always adhering to social distancing restrictions as well. And obviously a massive increase in online spending due to the fact that people just could not go to shops. Even purchasing things that you wouldn't necessarily expect, like we had a lot of car purchases online. People couldn't go and see cars and we're having to buy them online. So yeah, we got quite a lot of queries in relation to COVID that's still happening now. It's still carrying on, even when restrictions are starting to ease off.
Yeah, I think that's I guess you referred to holidays, and I think that's quite a key. We've hit a key point of the year, which is we know that this sort of we tend to get a lot of calls about holidays at this time of year anyway. But obviously, given that we are sort of in but not in a pandemic, and things sort of change from one day to the next. What are essentially, I mean, I appreciate this is a broad spectrum, but in terms of your broad consumer rights, if you have booked a holiday and something changes about your ability to go, what are people's rights in terms of changing or cancelling and those kinds of things?
Yeah, I guess it really depends what kind of holiday you've booked. There's two types of holiday. So you can either book a package holiday where travel, accommodation, tourist service is included, and that's like a cruise, like an all-inclusive holiday with flights, or you can have an independent booking. So that's just if you've purchased flights or a hotel booking separately. There's those two types of holiday. For package holidays, there's a piece of legislation called the Package Travel and Linked Travel Arrangements 2018, which essentially covers any significant changes to your booking. So if, for example, before departure, your flight is cancelled, or while you're on holiday, your hotel doesn't meet the standards you expect, or your hotel is cancelled, that legislation covers you. So you can either ask for a full refund, or you can ask for an alternative package to be provided, or a lower package and a difference in price to be given to you as well. For independent contracts, it can be a little bit tricky. There isn't that overall legislation that will cover you, so it is just common law. And again, if the trader cannot honour their end of the agreement, so if like the hotel booking is cancelled, you could just hold them in breach of contract and look to seek a refund. It can get a little bit complex in terms of obviously like the red, amber, green list and foreign travel, because that hasn't necessarily changed common law as such at this moment in time. It can be quite tricky to go down a breach of contract route, because the trader can still honour their service. It's the fact that you as a consumer cannot maybe fly out due to restrictions. So that can complicate things a little bit. In terms of that, we would maybe look at advising things like frustration or some more like complex consumer arguments, which can be quite difficult to kind of talk through. But there's definitely remedies there for consumers, regardless of what booking they've made. It's just that package travel holidays potentially offer a little bit more protection than maybe independent bookings.
Yeah, fair enough. That makes sense. And again, that feels really clear about sort of that there are, like you say, there are options out there for people. Like,
yeah,
so,
absolutely.
You know, it's always worth giving us a call if you think that maybe like you want to explore what your options might be.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we get calls from people. Sometimes they don't even know if they've booked on a package or not. They're not too sure. And we can go through that with you and talk through, you know, what your booking is, what rights you're entitled to. If it's not a package, that's fine. You've still got a legal argument to make. And yeah, we can absolutely help you try and figure out what way's best.
That's good. And is that while we continue talking, I'm just going to pop up the consumer line on the screen there, so that if people know who they're contacting, if they want to contact us. But just so are we finding that there are more calls like that coming through now, or is that sort of changing and fluctuating?
I think it's slowly getting better, but at the time of the pandemic, when it was at its highest point, it was more cancellations, whereas now I think it's, the hotel has been changed or the flight's been changed, things like that. Things are moving around. And obviously, if that doesn't necessarily work for you as a consumer, it doesn't mean you always have to go along with it. There are things that the law dictates that you can, you know, try and look for and seek a remedy. But yeah, the queries that we're getting from consumers is still very much that holidays are massively being impacted due to the pandemic. And I expect that will be the same, you know, for a while. People book holidays so far in advance as well that it can sometimes be hard to advise. You know, we will get calls that consumers are worried about what will happen in 2 or 3 months' time. And it's really hard for us to say because we don't know what the government restrictions will be at the time. So yeah, it can be tricky. And I do, you know, completely empathize with anyone who is worried about their own holiday.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, I mean, I've had a holiday cancelled myself in the last week. So, but thankfully, very nice and easily and everything worked out very well. But I can see that it is just, like you say, when we booked it, we figured everything would be fine.
Yeah, 100%. We do.
Like, people just don't know, do they? And I think I think it's really good to assure people essentially that we are here. If you do have questions and you do kind of want to understand more about what your rights are, because there probably is something that we might be, or there will be something that we can offer you in terms of help and assistance.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wonderful. So we've covered holidays, which is I think, like I say, it's a key top of people's minds at the moment now that they're sort of starting to think they might be able to go on them. But like I say, another kind of key thing or a key trait of the pandemic is that we've all been shopping online. Like my cardboard recycling bin has never been through the pandemic. In terms of shopping online, I think people potentially like sort of feel a bit more confident about their consumer rights when they've bought something in a shop and how they can sort of what they might be able to return or refund and things like that. In terms of online purchases, do your consumer rights look different? And again, has the pandemic changed anything in that respect as well?
Yeah, so there's two legal arguments we can give to when you're shopping online. If there is an issue with goods that you do purchase, the Consumer Rights Act is always going to be the strongest legal argument for yourself to make. And that hasn't really changed as such as with the pandemic. I mean, people, before COVID, were always using the consumer rights or your statutory rights to kind of put an argument to the trader. So that kind of legislation has remained the same. But I think we've seen a massive increase of, obviously with online orders, maybe people receiving items, not that there's necessarily anything wrong with the items, but they just don't really want them anymore, because in a shop you can go, you can look, you can pick something up, see if you want to buy it, and if not, put it back. But it's very different online. So we've seen a massive increase in advising a piece of legislation called the Consumer Contract Regulations. That legislation essentially gives you a 14-day cooling off period. So the day after your goods arrive, or the day you enter into a service contract, you get 2 weeks essentially to make an assessment, see if you want the item or the service anymore, and if not, you can be put back in your pre-contractual position, which is just a really fancy way of saying you can just get a refund. That's something that we've advised a lot. And obviously there are exemptions to that. So there is a massive list of exemptions I would advise anyone to have a look into. It can be things such as, consumables or products that are protected for health and safety reasons, etc. But yeah, essentially that legislation gives consumers a right to change their mind. And if that information is not provided to the consumer at the time of the purchase, it's called pre-contractual information, and it is a criminal offence not to provide that information to. So that's something we pass on to trading standards. So as you can imagine, since the pandemic has started, we've seen quite an increase of companies maybe trying to pull the wool over consumers' eyes sometimes and say no refunds and think that's a policy that they can say, when actually that's not the case at all. And a consumer is, in the majority of cases, always entitled to a refund.
Yeah, I think that's really good to know, because again, I think it's quite easy as a consumer to feel like, well, if a retailer says you're not entitled, that must be the case. And actually, unfortunately, sometimes
it isn't. Yeah, that you're completely right.
Yeah, I think so. It's good to know that, like you say, that cooling off period, I think, has always been a key thing that I'm really conscious of when I'm if I'm buying something online, that I think actually I have got a bit of time to change my mind if I want to. And again, I think it depends on the systems that you're using. So some retailers are very clearly set up to accept that people will change their mind when they get something, or they'll see it and they think, actually, that's not really what I was after. They almost have the most immediate refunds process that can possibly happen. And then others, it's a little bit of negotiation, I suppose. So again, it's just good to know that, I guess, if things don't go quite how you would hope in that process, that maybe it's worth, again, asking the questions of the consumer team.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing. It could be the case that you've ordered something online and there's potentially something wrong with it too. It could be that the item isn't, up to scratch. It could be faulty, or it doesn't match the description that you saw online. And in that case, then that's absolutely fine. We can talk you through those rights as well. The Consumer Rights Act would be applicable in that instance. And, there's tiers of remedy that we could always talk you through. And, there's always a case, if you've made an online purchase, we can always look into trying to resolve any issue that you've got if the trader has, sold you something that you're either not happy with, or, you don't necessarily like anymore. We can always talk through options and, remedies for that.
Yeah, that's really, really good to know. So when, obviously that's talking about one-off items that you maybe have ordered. What, in terms of contracts and service contracts, so it might be a mobile phone or something that you've agreed to, essentially. How, what are the deals with, again, you said that there's a cooling off period in that respect. How might that change for somebody, or what might that look like if people change their mind when they've signed up to a long-term contract and then want to get out of it?
So if you're within my 14-day cooling off period, absolutely great. You can change your mind. You can look to cancel that contract. If you're over the 14-day cooling off period, obviously it can get a little bit tricky. if that pre-contractual information was, supplied at the time of entering into the agreement. Basically, you're always going to be bound by the terms and conditions of the cancellation policy. So we would always advise consumers to look through any paperwork that you were given. If you weren't given any paperwork, ask that trader or ask the company for a copy so you can have a look and find out the cancellation policy. Some cancellation policies might involve charges to leave, like exit fees, termination fees. If that was what you agreed to when you signed up, you would ultimately be bound by that. However, you do find sometimes that traders or companies try and charge consumers and that charge was not put into the contract, in which case they would be in breach of that contract and a consumer could hold them in breach and potentially pursue damages or, look to get out of a contract. If a consumer was maybe misled into an agreement as well, we're finding quite a lot of calls at the moment where consumers think they're signing up for like a free 1 month subscription and that's it. And then obviously they're being roped into, 18 months, etc. There's arguments for that as well. We can argue that consumer was potentially misled and go down a piece of legislation called the Consumer Protection Regulations, which essentially enables a consumer to say, look, I didn't agree to this. I was missold this. I want to unwind the contract and I want to get out of it. So depending on the situational circumstance, again, with contracts, there's always usually a way to try and get out of them.
Yeah, I think that's really helped. That was going to be sort of my follow-up question was essentially those things where people think they're signing up for a free trial and think, oh, this is fine. Yeah. I'm going to get out of that. I'm going to get the free bit and then I'm going to not sign up to the contract. And somehow, their details have been taken and they find themselves paying for something on a long-term basis. So I think it's good to know, like you say, that there are ways out of that if you didn't intend to.
Yeah, I think one thing I would always advise anyone who's signing up to anything, just please make sure you read the terms and conditions, or please make sure you look through all that small print to find out exactly what you're signing up for, because although terms can be seen as unfair and etc., it's always just better to know exactly what you're agreeing to. Obviously, sometimes it's the case where traders, try and continue a contract on for longer than what you've agreed to, but just make sure you're really looking through what you're signing up for, and hopefully that can try and eliminate any kind of confusion or, dispute further down the line.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's really helpful information. Like you say, just make sure that you're reading up on your rights or reading up on the actual what you're signing up to before.
It's hard. I mean, I know so many companies provide terms and conditions that pages and pages long. So practically, I do the same. There's been times where I've ticked that box and haven't read, the terms and conditions through. But yeah, it's just something we are seeing an increase on. And I would just make consumers aware that just please read terms and conditions as much as you can, because it will always benefit you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like you say, I'm thoroughly guilty myself. I definitely tick boxes saying I've read something that I haven't read. But like you say, I think I try and do that when I'm confident of, that I don't have any desire to get out of this service rather than. But it's really easily done, isn't it? It's so easy.
It is. Of course,
just miss something, and that kind of, because you end up skim reading those kind of pages long worth of information. So again, really good to know that potentially there may be a way to sort of look at that, at least in terms of sort of the way people are misled. Something that I've always sort of been conscious of, and kind of I don't know what the rights and regulations are that sit around it, is that people say if you pay for something on your credit card that you're more protected. Is that a good way for people to go? Obviously, presuming that they've got the means to pay off that credit card in the first place. And we're not encouraging people to rack up credit card debt. But if they could, I sometimes think if I put that on the credit card and I've got the cash, I can pay it off straight away. It's just about having the added protection. How does that work?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. There's a piece of legislation called the Consumer Credit Act, and Section 75 of that act states that if you pay on a credit card for a purchase that is over £100 but under 30,000, you are covered and you can hold your credit card company in equal liability. Even if you pay £5 on your credit card, but a TV that you've purchased, for example, is £200, as long as the contract price itself falls within that remit, you could put as much or little on your credit card as you want. And to hold your credit card company in equal liability essentially means that if there's issues, problems further down the line, you can either go back to the trader who you purchased the item from, or you can go back to your credit card company too and try and seek a refund. I think, like you say, it's good to have that protection if, for example, you're maybe purchasing items that are quite expensive, or for example, if you're even things like building work, if you're worried that the trader might go out of business further down the line, you just know you have that extra protection in case something does go wrong, that, okay, well, I can't necessarily pursue the person who I entered into agreement with, but the credit card company can always help. So yeah, if you are worried or making like a big purchase, I would always advise to put it on the credit card. If you don't have a credit card, we'd always advise as well, debit cards can offer chargeback schemes too. And that's the same as if you made a credit card purchase that was under £100. It's not a legal requirement like it would be for Section 75, but chargeback means that your bank might be able to help you get the money back too. So it's just another form of redress that a consumer could look at. So debit cards and credit cards are usually the safest way to offer protection for what you've purchased.
Great. That's really good to know. And again, I think when it comes to you come back to that holiday situation. So I know that we had a holiday cancelled at the start of the pandemic that we had put on a credit card, and that we had, thankfully, the airline sorted it out themselves. But that we knew that we had that backup option, that they like said, you will be able to get it back through your credit card company if anything goes wrong, but you pursue this line first and just
I guess it's just nice to know you've got that second option. And again, if there's any difficulties with that credit card company to say, for example, they refuse to pay out, it's not necessarily the last step in the process as well. You could look at escalating your dispute to a financial ombudsman service too, and take it up to that second tier as well. So yeah, just because the credit card company might say no, again, you can always look at trying to resolve the issue at that next escalated step as well. So yeah, just some more protection that can be offered to the consumer. That's
really good to know. And again, those kind of the authority that people might sort of go to their credit card company says no, and again, someone presumes that's
the end of the road. Yeah, of course.
So yeah, again, it's good to know that our lovely consumer team are out there waiting to help people with queries like that. And speaking of questions, if you are watching and do want to drop a question into the comments box, then please do feel free. We are here for another 20 minutes to talk about all things consumer. So we've sort of briefly touched on it, but let's sort of come into a bit more detail. When it comes to traders, and I know businesses such as like building work particularly have, I mean, in a way they've gone through the roof through lockdown, because it's all people can do.
Of course.
But equally, like you say, sometimes you may come across a rogue trader, and sometimes you may just come across difficulties with that contract, I guess, that you've entered into, in terms of, they might be experiencing problems with supply, and they might then have the work might take longer, or it might be difficult to finish, or all of these kinds of things. Sometimes you've got someone a little bit dodgy on your hands. Tackling rogue traders first, how what sort of, I guess, sort of what kind of recourse do people have, and are there any kind of preventative things that people can do to protect themselves from rogue traders? What should people be looking out for when they're taking building work on, or other things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have quite a useful page on the Citizens Advice website, which is find a trader and check you can trust them. And we would always advise consumers to have a look and find a trusted trader. There's certain schemes such as Trustmark, Check a Trade, Which Trusted Trader, that are approved by Citizens Advice. And that means that you're going to work alongside a trader that, should hopefully not give you any issues. In terms of rogue traders, it's something that trading standards do take very seriously. And it is obviously a criminal offence to be scammed out of money, or, be threatened by a trader, etc., etc. So that's information we would always refer through to trading standards. And a lot of the time it will result in trading standards investigating that, potentially contacting the consumer back, etc. Things to look out for. We call it on the consumer line a doorstep crime. A doorstep crime would essentially be a trader turning up maybe unannounced to your property, maybe giving a leaflet, not providing a full company name or address, not providing too much information about themselves. Sometimes it could be like an unmarked van, and charging really extortionate prices for work. it's usually quite common for road traders to target elderly people. Not always the case, but you do find that a lot of our callers who've been targeted by road traders are elderly, and someone has knocked on the door and said, you need your roof doing. And obviously, you know, if you are elderly, you can't go and inspect that roof, and you will just agree to that. So we do find that they do target specifically vulnerable people. And obviously, if that is something that does happen to you, we do find that consumers are sometimes maybe like embarrassed to admit that. They don't want to call us. They feel embarrassed. They don't want to tell the family or friends that they've paid a lot of money, you know, for work that hasn't been done. The trader hasn't come back, or we've done a really poor job. We'd always say that we're always happy to help. We would never judge you for making any decision. We just want to try and report that trader to trading standards, maybe potentially report that to the police too, and obviously try and look to resolve the issue. And obviously, if there is issues with work that you've entered into an agreement for, you have multiple options to get out of that work. If you were misled into the agreement, again, consumer protection regulations. There's issues with the work, Consumer Rights Act. If you just wish to cancel and the work hasn't started, consumer contract regulations. So yeah, there's lots of different options for redress depending on, you know, what the situation is.
Yeah, I think that's really good to know. And I think, as you say, that sort of obviously you get a lot of those rogue traders and people taking action, people obviously not feeling that they want to take action, and we completely understand that. But obviously it's really important that we share as much intelligence as we have about those kinds of things, because if it's happened to you or to your neighbour, it could well be happening to like hundreds of people across.
Of course.
And so it is really important. But also I think it is good to know, again, like I think people feel confident about goods and returning like solid items. But when you've sort of said to somebody, oh, can you come and do my bathroom, or like, and, you know, circumstances change, or that, you know, that builder might say to you, oh, I said I could do it in September, but now it's going to be October. And you might say, well, that's no good to me. I don't want that contract. I think people feel a little bit hampered sometimes, don't they?
Yeah.
And so I think it's good to know, again, that there might be options around what action you can take, how.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Consumer Rights Act has a services section to that legislation. So if you've entered into, you know, an agreement for building work, or like a kitchen renovation, something like that, and you're not happy with the work because it's been carried out poorly, or it's dragging on and on and on, or you think you've been overcharged, or maybe the trader said they do certain things during the job and they didn't carry out those jobs, the Consumer Rights Act means that you're entitled to remedies, and those tiers of remedy can be a repeat performance, so asking the trader to come back and fix the faults free of charge within a reasonable time and without causing you any significant inconvenience. Or if that fails, or if that isn't an option, then a price reduction could be negotiated, so asking for up to 100% of your money back. So yeah, I think I understand exactly where you're coming from. I think sometimes when you're entering into like a service agreement, it's a little bit confusing to know where the law stands, but the consumer should always know that, you know, for any building work or any service agreement we've entered into, there's always redress under the Consumer Rights Act, and there's always options for remedies to be sought as well.
Yeah, that is really good to know. And it's like the consumer may not necessarily always be right, but they may always have rights. I guess the really cheesy way of looking at it. Sorry, I'm going to apologise for that terrible bit of wordplay.
No, I loved it. It's
fine. We've obviously, like, rogue traders kind of takes us down a certain line in terms of scams, and obviously people who do tune into our live streams regularly may have sort of spotted that we did a scams live stream specifically back, it would have been at sort of mid-June, because it was for Scams Awareness Fortnight. But so you can go back and watch that as well, a whole 45 minutes talking about scams. But while I have a lovely consumer advisor in front of me, I think it's really important to touch on it again. I guess have we seen quite a lot of scams like coming through again as a result of the pandemic?
Absolutely. There has been such an increase in scams. It's honestly insane. The majority of scams, I think, because scams know that people have been at home through lockdown, the majority of scams have been telephone calls or text messages. So a really common one at the moment is like the HMRC scam, where people are saying that they're owed or need to pay tax, things like that, or scam telephone calls about owing money to Amazon. we've seen a massive increase in those kind of calls. Obviously, we pass that intelligence straight over to trading standards, and we'd always advise the consumer again to potentially contact, the police if they're worried someone had come round, or, their local authority as well. But in terms of going forwards with scams, we can always advise on that too. We'd always say, I know, but it was probably mentioned in the scams video, to contact Action Fraud, but obviously they are, the number one place that we would signpost consumers to report a scam. And obviously there's also things we can advise to in regards to, if you're worried you've given out details, could potentially contact the Information Commissioner's Office, who deal with consumers' data and subject access requests. You can see if any of your data or information has been shared. And obviously, if you are concerned that you've given out personal information that could affect you further down the line, we'd always advise to contact creditors or credit reference agencies, banks, places like that. So we can always offer assistance and, advice in regards to scams as well.
Yeah. I think, like you say, it's one of those things, isn't it, where I'm just putting up a link there as well at the bottom, and I will pop it in the comments box so that it kind of, I think, so that people can copy and paste it if I can. I'm going to try, but I'm like, I've ended up very weird. Sorry, that was my lack of technological expertise. So I'll figure out a way to get that in the comments box. But sorry, this is really distracting me because I'm used to being on this side, so I'm going to put us back. We're blonde. So in terms of, as we say about scams, things where people sort of feel unable to report it and feel like a little bit embarrassed, because I guess probably people mostly think about reporting things when they have maybe fallen for the scam rather than necessarily, I've spotted something. Obviously, first and foremost, we would just say you really do, like as we've said already, it's so important that we report things like that, so that, like you say, trading standards can build up a good idea of if something is happening, if there's a trend somewhere, or if there's something happening in a particular area, but also just so that we can take action to help people get their money back. What about if people? So, for example, I get probably a good 30 emails a day that I know are absolute nonsense, and they mostly come into my junk mail, but every so often one slips through into my inbox, and I know they're a scam. Is there value in reporting things like that because I know that might catch somebody else out, or is it more about reporting things that have actually happened and are kind of, if someone's already been caught by something?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even if, you've seen a scam, or, you've received a telephone call and you've just put the phone down, haven't given any information, the more intelligence we can get about those kind of situations, the better. So for scam emails, for example, we'd always say, pass it over to us. We'll pass it to trading standards. Trading standards might contact the company who the scammer is impersonating. And that's something that a consumer could always do as well. I know in particular, HMRC, if you receive a scam text message, they like to know about it. They have a link on their website that you can pass that message to. So yeah, even if you're not victim to a scam, we'd still always say, pass it over to ourselves. Trading standards can start to build up the intelligence. And like you say, could be the case that somebody further down the line is unfortunately caught out by that scam, but we could maybe then try and figure out where the scams come from, etc. So yeah, it's always worth reporting, even, anything suspicious. But even if sometimes you're not convinced that it is a scam, we do have to remain impartial, so we could never say if it is a scam or not, unfortunately, but we can always advise and say, that has the hallmarks of a scam. I'd maybe advise not entering into that agreement, and we can kind of talk you through, if you are hesitant or worried about something, we can talk you through whether to us that seems suspicious or not.
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously the link that we've had up there was about sort of spotting like some of those trademark like scam sort of things that we would encourage you to look for. And in terms of reporting, obviously I'll put the consumer number up as well before we finish, but as you say, we would often encourage people to report to Action Fraud as well, so I'll just put their details up along the bottom. And I think, like you say, like a lot of those emails that I get, I do sort of think, well, that's just obvious, like you haven't even tried.
Yeah.
But some of them are absolutely terrifying. I've had the HMRC voicemail that tells me
so scary. It's so intimidating. And sometimes we'll get calls and people are like, I just carried on with the call because I was so scared. And I'm like, I know, I've had the calls myself. Like, some of them are so convincing. Like, I can really understand why people fall for them. And you should never be embarrassed or afraid to admit that you're a victim of a scam. There's no embarrassment or shame in it at all.
No, it's like I say, and as like you say, it's so easily done. It's
Really
like, it's a very quick thing, and I think what we like, we would always say that, like you say, some of those things that scammers play on is kind of that, oh, this is, it's a limited time offer.
Yeah.
Need you, it's really urgent because, like with the HMRC one, there's a warrant out for your arrest, and if you don't act immediately. You're going to have the police knocking at your door. Obviously, it's really unnerving, and of course, completely understandably, people want to take action to stop happening as soon as they possibly can. So it makes a lot of sense that people will say, oh, if it's as simple as handing over my bank details to pay this fine, I'll pay the fine, and then I'll figure out what I do afterwards. And it's like, actually, it is. People are completely fine, aren't they, to take 5 minutes or to take however long they need.
Yeah, of course. We'd always say, part of the consumer protection regulations states that if like a sale was aggressive, you have redress. And aggressive doesn't always mean a trader being threatened. It could be, a high pressure sale, saying you need to make this payment now, you need to, do this and that. And we'd always say, look, just take a second, take a step. No legitimate trader would ever want to rush you into making any kind of payment. There's no time limit on something you can purchase. So ultimately, like you say, it's always worth just taking a couple of seconds just to think about it.
Yeah. And like you say, I think it's about sort of remembering that some of those formal like agencies like HMRC, that wouldn't be their first course of action to call you up and tell you they're going to send you to prison. They'll often take steps before that.
Exactly.
So if there's been no sign of any kind of sort of action being taken prior to this, I guess then that's always a bit of a warning flag.
Yeah.
I know in terms of scams as well, we often kind of see people who, I guess, they've fallen for one of those, not necessarily get rich quick, but like investment scams. I know that we've seen quite a lot more of those kind of things through. What essentially, and I guess particularly at a time where everyone's feeling a little bit financially vulnerable at the moment, like the pandemic has had such a significant impact on so many people's finances. What sort of things do we see in that respect? Well, when people call us about those kinds of scams, what is it that's happened? Are there any kind of key scams that people should be looking out for, or is it a really broad field?
I think a majority of calls that we've received are Bitcoin scams. So I think, again, scammers know that people sat at home online more, and they're trying to buy into the hype of Bitcoin and investment scams and get rich quick schemes, for example. We always kind of say that if it sounds too good to be true, it unfortunately probably is. And it's just one of those things that unfortunately has just seen a massive increase since the pandemic has begun. A lot of the time, a consumer will put a small amount of money in, the trader will make it more believable by saying, here's your investment back, invest more money further down the line. And then that's when the consumer can get caught out. Sometimes people invest thousands and thousands into these scams, and it can be quite tricky to advise because sometimes the scammers themselves are based abroad, in which case UK law might not be applicable. So the consumer team might not be able to advise, and we'd have to signpost you somewhere else. So it can get quite complex. I would always advise you were going to enter into any kind of investment scheme. You can check it's regulated by the FCA, and also just check what country's law that trader is operating under, and if they do seem legitimate.
Yeah, that's really good to know, I think, because like you say, that kind of, particularly like traders from abroad, which it feels like it might be a loophole, and again, people back off because they think, oh, actually, I don't have like recourse to do anything about that. But I think, it's definitely worth pointing out, I guess, that, like you say, that scams unfortunately just come in all shapes and sizes, don't they? And it's so hard. I sort of feel like I've been working with Citizens Advice for nearly 8 years now, and I've been talking about scams for pretty much the entire time that I've worked here in some way, shape, or form. And it feels like there's always something new.
Literally, I agree.
Yeah, so I think it's really difficult we get that, like, people don't necessarily spot them easily, and yeah, we would absolutely encourage people, as we've said multiple times, give us a call. Our consumer line is there. I'm putting up some key links into the chat box, and I'm actually doing it properly now. So the first one there is getting help with online scams. So there's a specific scams action service that people can use, isn't that? Essentially is like targeted to online scams. So that's our scams action service. And then if you are interested in the checking if something might be a scam link as well, then that is there. I was like, is that going to come up? There we go. So you can see if you are sort of slightly concerned, that should just make it a little bit easier for people to be able to click on them at the end. But yeah, I think it's, like you say, consumer is such a broad topic. We could be here all night. But yeah, I guess was there anything else that you sort of feel people need to know about as consumers? Is there like anything that sort of you feel people should know before we leave today?
I think just take your time. If you're entering into any kind of contract agreement, it doesn't necessarily have to be a contract that's written on paper. Contract can be verbal as well. So just make sure if you're agreeing to something or entering into any kind of service or purchase, just really take the time, think, what am I buying? Am I happy to go ahead with this? If there's any terms and conditions, read over them. And obviously, if you do encounter any issues, just give us a call and we will be more than happy to help.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining me, Daisy. This has been really, really informative. And have a lovely evening, everybody watching. Have a lovely evening. Thank you for tuning in. And we'll be back, no doubt, in a couple of weeks with something new to talk about. So thanks very much.
Cheers. Thank you.